It's in Scandinavia, in the northern countries, that can be found the last of the large, wild, unexploited territories of Europe. And that's where the first of Europe's national parks were born.
Sweden became a forerunner by creating 9 parks at once in 1909. Their names are Sarek, Abisko, Garfitan.
In 1914, before Iceland, Spain, and Finland, Switzerland in its turn created its first national park, an alpine park.
The ibex herds of Gran Paradiso testify to a previous idea of wildlife preservation. They owe their survival to the magnanimous decision of a single hunter, Emmanuel II, King of Italy, who, as if suddenly struck by grace, imposed absolute protection of his reserve.
The protection of nature no longer depends upon selfishness or privilege. It is structured around a simple idea, the necessity of preserving and sharing a collective heritage that is both fragile and unique. Established in 1963, the La Vanoise National Park borders for 14 kilometers on the French side the Italian park of Gran Paradiso. Together, these high mountain parks cover 100,000 hectares and form the largest national reserve of Western Europe. The park protects more than 1,000 varieties of flowers and many animals such as chamois and marmots.
Here, as in all parks, conservation covers the mineral, vegetal, and animal realms. La Vanoise, with its 500 kilometers of marked trails and 20 overnight refuges, is a paradise for hikers and photographers. Upkeep and maintenance is carried out to facilitate exploration, on condition that nature does not suffer from it.
In natural parks, in return for accepting to comply with a few varying restrictions, we are given the chance to experience nature in its unspoiled magnificence. This French park is among the 200 national parks that can be found between the Atlantic Ocean and the Ural River. Each park has its own distinct organization and ambition.
Musk oxen, which had all but disappeared from Europe, were reintroduced in Norway in the large park of Dovre Fjeld. At Bielovieja, where a few scraps of our primal forest subsist, we can find the last bison of the continent. Apart from these spectacular large national parks, Europe boasts almost 15,000 protected areas.
We're entering one of the large wildlife sanctuaries of Europe, the largest protected area of the whole Iberian Peninsula. Wolves and wild bulls were plentiful here once, and what formerly were private royal hunting grounds is now a large national park.
The park's fame is closely linked to the tragic destiny of a young lady in the 16th century, the daughter of the Princess of Eboli, Doña Ana. Doña Ana disappeared in the thickets here, never to be seen again. Since that day, this area, previously called the Royal Grove, was named after her.
The 50,000 hectares of the Great Spanish Park are located in the extreme south of the European continent. It is not far from Seville, in the province of Huelva, that one finds the enchanted land of Doñana. This part of the Spanish coast has long sandy beaches bordering the Atlantic, and the ocean characterizes this park, which stretches from the west to the east, from the coast to the shores of the Guadalquivir River.
This distinctive location between the sea and a large river creates exceptional conditions.
The very special nature of the Doñana area is the product of long evolution. In primeval geological eras, the mouth of the Guadalquivir was an enormous estuary. The formation of a coastal sandbar ended up by isolating a huge stretch of water. In Roman days it was called Lake Ligustinus. This shallow lake was gradually filled in by alluvial deposits and became a swamp.
Even today, Doñana's landscape keeps changing. A western wind blows perpendicular to the coastline, sweeping up silica from the immense rings of dunes which border the shore. Inexorably, the sand creeps up along the pine forest, encircling and smothering it. These great mobile dunes create spectacular scenery, which was described in 1910 in a book by Chapman and Buck called Unexplored Spain.
To the west are revealed vast vistas of Saharan desert with kilometer upon kilometer of shining sands, totally devoid of any vegetation. Oh, the exaltation of magnificent desolation, the splendor of sterility.
Except for the softened contours of its dunes, Doñana offers only flat stretches of land, a succession of varied landscapes of contrasting vegetation, an astonishing patchwork of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems.
Doñana is the host to an extraordinary wealth of wildlife. Being near the Straits of Gibraltar, it is one of the main stopping places for the great bird migrations between Europe and Africa. Hundreds of thousands of birds come to spend the winter here. More than 150 species visit the park.
Since their origin, the swamps of Guadalquivir, being inhospitable to men, have been a privileged enclave for the animals of the region, especially birds.
Despite its renown, despite the fact that it is a recognized part of Spanish heritage, the great painter Goya, for example, visited it in the 18th century. Despite having been the object of many studies and scientific expeditions, this natural treasure was menaced in the 1950s.
In 1959, some private companies, as well as some departments of the Spanish government, undertook to drain the swamps, threatening to destroy the unique ecosystems. International wildlife preservation societies immediately mobilized, particularly the World Wildlife Fund, for which this was one of the first urgent cases. It's thanks to them that the processes started which led to the creation of the Doñana National Park in 1969. Today, the park attracts visitors from around the world who set out on their visit of Doñana from the La Rosina and the Acebuche visitor centers.
Doñana is explored with the help of organized visits. We'll pass lagunas, dunes, cross pine forests, and the infamous thickets. In this fashion, however, we've little chance of coming upon the two treasures of Doñana, the lynx and the little Spanish mongoose, unique in Europe and called the meloncello.
During the wet season, when the swamp is flooded, the best way to visit the park is by horse. Huts have been put up which constitute excellent observation posts all year round.
Numerous flocks of wild, migrating geese stop off at Doñana from northern Europe. Here there are more than 70,000 birds. These geese are the ancestors of our domestic geese. Males and females have the same coloring. They form couples that remain together for life.
The severe drought of the summer of 1981, the worst in a century, took many casualties among the flocks of geese. 15,000 of them died. When the sun is high, during the hottest months, the park wavers between desert and savanna.
Barreling through these pristine landscapes in a four-wheel drive vehicle seems almost sacrilegious, yet paradoxically, it is only in this context that it is possible to both open the park to the public and preserve the environment. There are strict rules, and no one is allowed to tread the sands beyond 3 or 4 meters from the trail.
The animals have become used to this rumbling and display uncommon behavior. They don't seem to be at all disturbed by the passing vehicles, but if one of them stops to allow a closer view of the animals, the engine must be left running. If it stops, the animals interpret it as an unusual event and flee.
The biological preserve, situated at the historic center of the park, its very heart, is a true sanctuary. A statue of a lynx, Doñana's emblem, guards the entrance. This area is off-limits to tourists and is visited only by scientific expeditions. Doñana's wildlife flourishes here under optimal protection.
The park strives to maintain several couples of imperial eagles, but the splendid birds of prey are scarce in the Doñana sky. It's more common to come upon royal kites, but it's best not to disturb the birds, especially during the nesting period.
Despite the wealth of animal life in the park, it is only with patience and discretion that we can experience some precious moments.
To those with less patience, the exploration of Doñana might seem too monotonous, too partial, or too regulated. Tours are guided, private cars are especially forbidden, movements are limited and restricted to specific parts of the park. But this is only because Doñana is anxious to preserve its enchanted land.
A 1,000 kilometers northeast of Doñana, nature, with the watchful assistance of man, has another little miracle in store for us.
The little island of Port Cros is located in the Mediterranean Sea, about 15 kilometers off the French coast. It's one of the 3 islands which make up the little archipelago of the Ile de Hierro. Measuring only 4 kilometers by 3, it's the smallest. Also the most mountainous. and a pleasant surprise in this region, which, although magnificent, is unfortunately often disfigured by developers.
Just a few minutes by boat from the coast with all its bustle and agitation, Port Cros is like another world, a world that has remained natural and human. Cars are forbidden on the island, which has about 40 inhabitants, mostly fishermen.
This little jewel of an island set in the Mediterranean was a much sought-after prize, and it has remained such a paradise thanks only to the foresight of the owners, who willed it to the French government.
The island is covered with scrubs and green oak and alpine forests. It slopes gently from the south towards the north, where sit the bays, the port, and the little village.
In 1963, Port Cros became both a land and underwater national park. With its 1,800 hectares of preserved seascape, it's the first park of its kind in Europe and in the Mediterranean.
Many attempts to conquer the island were made in the last 2,000 years, and several forts remain to bear witness to its turbulent history. The archive reproductions of these buildings seem to show that the island was all but barren of vegetation until the last centuries. Poets say that Port Cros is made of water and golden shale. Geologists say it is all schist and mica schist. Broken, laminated or folded, strips, slivers, and leaves of rocks.
In the southern part of the island, where the cliffs drop off to the sea, we come upon this strange limestone sculpture. It turns out to be a fossilized dune, dating back several dozen thousands of years to when this little piece of land was still attached to the mainland. Its present isolation has indeed made Port Cros a land apart, a land where the sea reigns, and where we are encouraged to explore the depths.